going to start something new, and I'm going to try and do the entire thing on camera. People had been asking me if they could see my entire process, how I made the choices I made from start to finish. So I'm going to try and show that here. And lately I have been working in colorways. And by that I mean just taking shades of one color and stitching within that. So I've got a bunch of brown hoops going on right now, and I've got some green ones. And this is kind of a burgundy wine maroon color, a deep red, not red. And this is a 6-inch hoop. And I experimented a little bit with this on some brown hoops. And so now I want to try it a little bit more intensely. And that is, you often see me start with couching. But what I want to do here is I want to make it all couching to start. I mean, like a lot of couching. And that's just to see what happens, because we have to sample these things out. If we don't sample, if we don't play around with things and try them out, we're never going to know if it's something that we like. Or it might be something we've seen somebody else do and we think, oh, that looks like fun, and then we try it and we're like, I didn't enjoy that. So you got to sample, and for me the challenge has been sampling small. I always seem to try things really big. I did try these experiments in colorways on smaller hoops, and they were just too small for me. So 6-inch is a pretty good experiment for me, and I can decide when I see what it looks like when it's done, if I want to keep it round, if I want to cut an organic shape around it, or if I want to square it off. But you can see I'm leaving little loops off the edge. I don't know how that's going to be stitching. It might get in the way. But I want to give it a shot. This is either banana yarn or sari yarn, where they take the scraps and they spin it into this art yarn. And I love it because as I work with it, it starts to come unraveled a little bit, and that gives it a really interesting texture. And you know me, it's all about the texture. I should say, how did I decide what I was going to use? I literally just went to all my little baskets in my studio and picked out anything I had in that colorway. And so there's felt, there's little scraps of fibers. I didn't have a lot in this. Here's some ribbon. There's not a lot. Some different fibers. I have some sari ribbon that's in the same colorway if I decide I want to put pattern in there, but I'm thinking, maybe what I would do, like on this one, is just grab that little chunk in there, because I really think I want to stay in the one colorway. And then this is some silk that would go with that very nicely. So we'll just see as we move along. But for now, I kind of want to just start playing with this. This is some wool yarn in the same colors. And I put the thickest stuff on the bottom. And I'm going to leave the loose edges coming off the side, because when all of this is stitched down and I'm completely done with it, I might decide instead of loops that I want to cut things. And I'm going to leave this a little long, because if I decide I don't like that, then I can come back up here and make a loop, or I might have a mix. This is completely abstract freeform. I have no pattern. I'm just kind of playing around, and I'm going to see where it takes me. And that's kind of a scary thing to do without a pattern. For some people. For me, it's more scary to have a pattern, because when I have a pattern, I feel like something has to be something. Like I'm trying to come to a certain point. Okay, I've already decided I want to loop the smaller yarn in. So there we go, design decision. And again, I can decide to cut those later if I want. So I'm going to loop that one in. I can tack that down. Here's another piece of fiber in the same colorway. All these fibers are nice and soft, so I will be able to stitch through them and over them. And I could get to the end of this, I could get all this stuff tacked down and then decide I hate it and I don't want to go any farther, and that's fine. You have to allow yourself the freedom to play around. And I've got a small piece of this, but I don't think I need to add any more. So I think I'm going to try and pin some of this down. It's kind of hard because it's so heavy and it's on a small hoop, but I could get myself a little bit of help. Now, if you wanted to, you could absolutely put this on some dissolvable fabric, and then you could stitch it with the sewing machine, or you could stitch it by hand and then rinse out the dissolvable fabric, and you would have kind of like that lacy effect. That's a fun thing to do, and I might do a video on that one of these days. But I just kind of wanted to, get in here and start playing. I realized I've been working on the brown hoops, and while I'm really enjoying what I'm figuring out while working on them, I needed to get some more color. I was missing having any kind of color. And there's no way, these pins are not going to catch everything. I'm not trying to catch everything. I'm just going to try and keep some of it kind of there. And of course, as I start to couch it down, again, not everything is going to stay. I don't expect it to. All right, that's going to be good enough. You see I've got an orange piece of felt back there because that's what I had in this size. Doesn't matter, you're not going to see it when I'm all done. And I've got a chenille needle. I think this is a 22 because I don't have any 24s handy. That's fine. I mean, we're just... All right, and again, there is no rhyme or reason. I'm just going to try and get this attached to the fabric on the hoop, because that's when then the fun is going to start. When I get all done with that, it's going to be really exciting to see what I can stitch over it and what I'm going to add in between. I'm not thinking about having any of the white showing. If it does, it's okay, but honestly, I think by the time I'm done getting all the texture on there, because you know that's where my heart is all about the texture, I think you probably are not going to see it. And you could also just come right up through the fibers. So I'm just coming up and going down. This is not, and I'm not trying to make, with this couching, I'm not trying to make any kind of a design. Of course, you know, sometimes when you do couching, you might want to make it in some kind of a pattern. This is more just, you know, tacking things down. You're going to see some of the, I don't know if you can see it here, but there you can see some of the threads sometimes. That's okay too, because of course this is just that first layer. And sometimes it's hard to think with fibers in terms of layers. We're used to thinking about it with paper collage. You know, we see people layer things up in their collage that way. And we think about it, you know, if you're doing a quilt or a quilted background of some time, you know, we think, okay, there's a layer there. But fibers layer too. And getting my non-red colors out of there. I mean, you can take a piece of fabric and each time you put another layer of fiber over it, you're going to get a different effect. So layers just mean adding more. And a lot of times when I feel like something's not done, it means I need to put another layer down of something. Just one more layer. I think couching is just such a wonderful way to get a good start on something, so you're not looking at the blank page anymore. You've got a head start, and then you can take it from there. And there have been times where I have put down a lot of couching and then I've taken it back off again as I started to stitch. But this one I'm really going to try and see where it takes me if I leave it, you know, really thick, because I think it could be really interesting. It already feels cool. It already feels really cool. I mean, because we all do that, right? We all come in and pet our projects and see how they feel. All right, I'm going to pause the camera and I will get all this couched down and then come back and show you the next steps. Okay, so I'm back and I have this couch down and I figured some things out. Number one, if you're going to couch a big area like this, it's really nice, I think, if you go around the outside edges first, so you can check yourself in here. And so if I couched around there and then I just kind of worked my way in. I also figured out these loops are already kind of bothering me. It makes me think of a spirograph, and that was not the look I was going for. So I may end up doing something like bringing them in places and tacking them down like that, but I'm not going to make a decision about that right now, because possibly when I start getting some other stitches on there, it might make a difference to me. We'll see. I can always change my mind. I went back to the studio to see if I had anything else in these colorways. I was really hoping for some variegated yarn, and I don't really have that, so I'll have to kind of make my own. But I did find some more thread and some lace, which is good because I can take the lace, of course, and make my texture, and that will give something a little more of a 3D effect. I found some more threads. This one's got it's too red. I don't like that one on it. That one might work, we'll see. And I found some ribbon, a different width ribbon, so I can do something with that. And then I found these. I forgot I had these. They're little tiny bits of wool in all these really interesting organic shapes. So I can definitely add those in places, which will be really cool. They fill in nicely. This lace, but yeah, that's too red. That might be too pink. I think that's one of those strands in there is pink, but we'll see as I go along. So now I have to decide what's next. And I think it's probably time to get some stitches in there because that will sort of give me a direction. I'm thinking bullion stitches, but now I'm looking at this ribbon and I'm also thinking, I bet I can do French knots with this ribbon. So those are two things to think about. All right, see, that's the problem is all these things are so close to the same color, but that's okay. It's gonna be texture, right? It's gonna be texture. Okay, so I've got 3 strands of 2 colors in there, and you know, I have no idea where I want to do any of this, so we're just gonna start somewhere. You got to start somewhere, right? Okay, and as I'm working with this, I'm already deciding this is not going to be fun to do bullion knots with those 6 strands. So you know what? I can change my mind. This is early enough. I can change my mind. And instead of worrying about variegated, I will figure something else out as I go along. So I'm going to do this with just 3 strands of embroidery floss instead. There have been times where I've had a really heavy yarn and I have forced myself to continue and gotten so far that I had to keep going even though it wasn't fun because I needed to balance something out, and I'm trying to get better about that, making a decision quickly. It's like, okay, no, if this isn't going to pull through easily, then maybe that's not the thing that I want to be using. Yeah, that's much better. So 3 strands of floss, which means I'll have to be careful what I use, and that's fine. It's just you got to decide that. It's sort of like deciding if you've got a heavily painted cloth, is it something that you're going to want to stitch a lot through, or maybe you're only going to want to do a few stitches. So you've got, you know, materials choices to make as well. Now somebody else might take a look at this and say, well, they want to bring in another color to alternate and kind of offset, contrast, whatever you want to call it, this burgundy. But it does get challenging working in just one color, but then it makes me just think about texture. What can I do to add the texture? I like them where they stick up a lot off the fabric, but I do think I want my longer needle. That's okay. We'll do some with this and we'll do some with the other needle. Even though a bullion knot is this long loopy thing, just like a loop of fiber, it's a different texture, so I like adding that. And I don't know why, but I tend to think in terms of 3. Well, I tend to always think in terms of 3 when I'm thinking about art. So now I've got a loop of thread here. I'm not going to worry about it. It looks like I didn't make my knot long enough. It's okay because that will get covered up later. But when I'm doing bullion knots, I definitely tend to think in terms of 3 of them together, whether they're going the same direction or crisscross, doesn't matter. And you won't really see the effect of multiple bullion knots right away. Let's see, where do I want to come? I'm going to come over here. It's not until they get masked. And I can already tell, I'll do this with the floss, but I'm definitely going to want to do this with a pearl cotton, the heaviest one that I've got. And sometimes if you've got a really loose weave, you can even do bullion knots with something like this, but I'll probably save that for some French knots or some drizzles. Looping and looping. I pull it out part way and I'm holding it even though, so it's all floppy here, but then I haven't let go of the needle, and so I'm holding it at the base as I slide those loops down, and that lets me do, even though I've got the short bullion needle, it lets me get a really long one. So now that I've got 3 of them there, you can see, hopefully, that it is a different texture. It's a slightly different texture, and you'll be able to see even more when it's masked. All right, let's see, just because I'm not going to do all the stitching on camera, but I wanted to give you an idea what I was going to do, and I'll do some of this off camera. This is a 18, chenille 18. Let's check 2 things here. So this is just some scrap yarns that a friend gave me. So it's a 4-ply, and I want to see 2 things. One, if I separate it into 2 plies, is it strong enough for me to stitch? So yes. So I could stitch that. By doing this, I'm testing the integrity of this yarn, and I would be able to pull this in and out of my fabric just fine. So that could be interesting. What I see here is it does have a pink one, and I don't know how easily, no, that's spun together, so I wouldn't be able to do that. But that is something that I can do, and that means that I can do a lot more with this than I thought. I want to check this one too. So this one is 4-ply, and that is strong enough. Now when I separate yarn like this, I keep short links. I don't do my really big links because each time you pull it through the fabric, you're going to stress it a little bit. So that's good to know. That gives me 2 options there. Looking at this, and I'm wondering if that's going to work. That might work. Just because I don't have that many things in these colorways. So actually I'm going to do another bullion knot with this. This is a wool. I think it's some Appleton wool. And let's just see if I double this, it will give me a different texture. And of course, because it's wool, it's going to give me a different texture. And truly, you're going to need to see these things masked in order to see a difference. So I'm going to show you a few things, and then I will go off camera and do a bunch of stitches and come back before I do a different kind of texturing bullion. I'm going to come just anywhere in the middle. I think this is one of those colors that could be considered either burgundy or red. Depending on what it's with. Just make it as long as I can. When I get my other needle, these bullions will be fatter too, so it's longer and fatter. Okay, so now if I make it where it's standing up like that at an angle, you're going to get a different textural look, or I could of course tack it down. And I like this with the wool. I think I like them better than I do with the floss. So off camera I'll probably do a whole bunch of these with the wool, and I think I will try, I need to go see if I have any more thicker pearl cotton. Now, one of the advantages of having a short bullion needle is when you have this little bit of extra yarn, you can make, it makes it easier to finish it off without having a bunch of leftover yarn. You can make shorter sections there a little bit more easily. But I don't use them quite as often as I use my long ones. Okay, had another look around and I did find some pearl cotton 5, which will make some really nice bullion knots with my longer needle. So let me show you the difference here. This is my short bullion knot needle and this is my long one. So sometimes you really want to do a long one. The long bullion needles also come in handy for drizzle stitch, which I will be adding on here. But first I wanted to see what this little ribbon would look like if I did some really wonky French knots with it. Of course, ribbon work can give you some beautiful, delicate looks. I don't do anything very delicate. Can't do my normal kind of knot here. Let's see. All right, so I'm just going to see, what is this going to look like? This might be too thick to even pull through here. I don't know. I'm going to come over here where we've got a blank spot. No, I can get it through. I'm going to do, so normally you would be very, very careful if you were doing ribbon work and you would not twist your ribbon. I don't care. I want to make something just kind of really wonky and see what kind of a look we're going to get. And I do. I like that. It's a different kind of knot. Is it perfect? No. Is it the look I want in here? I don't know. But since I've got the needle threaded, let's just go ahead and put a few more in here. And we'll do them different wraps. That was a 3. Let's try it with just a 1. And again, it's another texture. Let's see, we'll come over here and do another. Let's try one on top. I don't know if I can get it through the, yep, I can get it right through that yarn. It's gonna be harder to come back down. All right, so that's good to know. Let's get ourselves out of this mess. And we came up through it, but let's go down. I'm going to make it a twist one, and I'm going to twist my ribbon. I'm not going to try and make anything perfect. Again, you know, perfect is not something that I ever aspire to anymore. All right, but see, that just gives me some interesting little loops. And again, until things are masked, when you only see a couple of them, you know, it's not much. It's over time as this builds up, and that's really what these little hoops are for me, is they are just experiments in texture, different ways that I can add texture to things. And what I learn on these little experiments is I might decide on a new piece that I want to do a whole bunch of these masked together where they shine. Right now I'm kind of liking just adding them into places, and it's just another look. Yeah, I like them when they're bigger. The single ones get lost. This is the way I work. This is pretty much when I say I've been stitching all day, this is what it's like. I'll try a few things. Now some people, they'd say, oh, okay, I'm going to do bullion knots right now, and then they'll sit down and do a whole bunch of them. I tend to do a whole bunch of experimenting to see how I feel about something, and then I'll sit down and do a bunch of other things. The other thing I want to show you is the drizzle stitch, because I do like to add that. That gives me a chance to come up. And again, it depends on what yarn you use, what thread you use to get what kind of an effect you're going to get. So I'm going to use, if you haven't done one before, it's nice to use a floss or something slippery. It won't be quite as thick, but it will give you the feel for what they're going to be like. So this is just the 3 strands of embroidery floss, and I'm going to use my short bullion needle because it's just going to be little ones. And I'm going to bring my needle up. I don't have a pin cushion over here. It's really helpful if you have a pin cushion to stick your drizzle back down in. So you're going to take your, you know, my threads come up, and I'm going to take the thread out of the needle, and I'm going to stick it right down next to the hole, not in the same hole, but right next to the same hole that I came up from. And this is called a cast on stitch. And so I'm just going to cast them on. I'm going to put my finger down on the thread, wrap it over, and slide it on the needle. And I'll do this with a couple different yarns so you can see the different effects that you get based on what you use. Now, if I wanted them to be really long, I would be using my long bullion needle. Takes a long time if you're using floss. So if you have a pincushion or something, or a pillow, when I'm sitting on the couch, I'm usually stitching with a pillow on my lap, and then my needle just goes through and sticks in the pillow, and then I don't have to worry about it coming out. Because that's frustrating. If I pulled it out right now, all these stitches would just come off the needle and I would have to start over again. So you don't have to go all the way to the top. You can have a very short drizzle, and then you want a needle threader, unless you've got really good eyes. Which I do not. And then you're going to thread your needle again while it's still in that hole. Okay. Now, one of the things that used to fumble me up all the time when I was doing drizzles was I had my thread pulled long like this, and it made it very difficult to pull everything through. So I make it so I have a very short tail, because the needle tail and the tail have to go all the way through those stitches you've cast on. So then you're going to pull it. I just realized on the other side, okay, what I did, my needle was stuck right through the knot. You're going to pull it right through those stitches. And this is a very short drizzle, so it's just like this little twisted thing that sticks up. Let's see if I turn the focus on, if that would help. You can see it kind of like that. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll make them really long, and then I'll start tacking them down. But on this piece, I am just going to, I'll come back to that. I want to show you one with a thicker yarn. All right, so I've got my really long one, and you're only limited by what you can get through that thread. So I probably couldn't get, maybe I can. Let's see. Can we get this through that head? Probably not, though. Yeah, so see, it doesn't want to go through. So I can't use that with the bullion needle. But I have my thicker 18 chenille, and normally you wouldn't do a a drizzle stitch with a chenille needle. But then that told me, well, you know what? I bet I have something else that's going to be long and pointy with a large head. So let's take a look. And I couldn't tell you what these were. They came in some kind of a set of something else. They're not tapestry needles because they still have a sharp point. But that was an 18 chenille, and this is something else. Maybe it's still a tapestry needle with a sharp point. I don't know anything about tapestry needles. But this one, I bet I can get through there. Yep, goes right through. I'm just going to cut a chunk of yarn. And then, of course, it's a fatter needle, so it is going to leave a bigger hole through there, but that came right on through. That's fine. And this one should be easier to see because the yarn is fatter. Next, I don't have my pillow here. I got to be careful that I don't pull this out all the way. Since it's on my desk, it's kind of slipping around here. And so again, I have the thread. I'm going to put my finger down on the thread and just loop it around and twist. So I've got that little twist, and that's what's going over the top of the needle. When I'm learning a new stitch, I do a bunch of it, like a ton of it. I mean, like, you know, for the next 5 or 6 projects, I'm using that stitch all the time. And that's how it becomes that muscle memory. if you only do it a few times and then you go on to learn something else, you haven't had a chance to build up that muscle memory that will allow you to go back to that stitch again and again easily. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. I don't know that many stitches. I'm still figuring out new ones or how to manipulate the ones I do know. I had more yarn on. See, I'm never sure how much yarn it takes. You gotta make sure you're gonna have enough room to be enough yarn left to go the rest of the way through those stitches. But oh, good. I'm glad this one's gonna be long. Okay, so let's rethread this needle. And sometimes the fatter yarns, they're going to give you a little bit of trouble pushing through. So I just kind of work it slowly, and I just kind of work them off my needle bit by bit like that, pulling it through the other side slowly. There's no reason to rush. Just pulled it out of the head of the needle, but that's okay. And now I have this wonderful long drizzle. What's fun about these, you get that vertical texture happening, and you know, I tend to mask them, but you can also twist them over so you get a loop, half loop like that. You can lay them down and couch them. You could put a bunch of them, you know, in a row, and then you could have, you know, a different kind of effect there. So they're just something really fun to play with. So while I am off camera, I'm going to be doing some bullion knots. I'm going to do some drizzle knots, and I'm going to do some French knots with the ribbons. And then I'll come back and show you some other ideas. I won't do this off camera, but you know, I can come in after I get some of these other things in there, and I could decide to fill in some spots with these or not. I could also take my silk and make little chunks of texture that come in there, but I kind of like to do that after I've got some more knots in there. So I will stop the video for now and come back at the next stage.